is Brad Schaefer. I'm the director of the UCLA Kretz Center for California Conservation Science. And thank you so much for being here at our new venue. This is the first time we've held this lecture at Pepperdine, and I've got to say, I'm starting to understand why people like to live in Malibu. You kind of can't, you certainly can't beat the views, and you can't beat the weather. Just before we get started, I just want to say a few things about the Kretz Center. We are an academic center at UCLA. That is, we're a consortium of faculty members, grad students, postdocs, and we all have a very kind of singular mission, which is to do the very best to do and enable the very best academic science that we can in ecology and evolution and behavior, and simultaneously apply that science to truly meaningful conservation and management efforts. And we do that integration across academic science and conservation by working with partners. We partner very closely with the National Park Service, with the MRCA, with state parks. More recently, we've initiated some very exciting new collaborations with the Natural History Museum and with the Nature Conservancy here in Southern California, and we're very, very excited about those efforts. The Kretz Center came into being about 5 years ago. I moved down here from UC Davis to take over as director of it 3 years ago. And really the way that the Kretz Center works, the reason why we can accomplish the things that we do, is because of the generosity of our sort of founding patron and sponsor, Morton Kretz. Morton's an absolutely amazing sort of stalwart and advocate for environmentalism and conservation here in Los Angeles. He's also a great supporter of UCLA and our educational mission. And I'd like you to just join me right now. Morton, please stand up and take a bow. Mort is certainly my personal hero when it comes to these kinds of things in Los Angeles. We've had a great year at the Kretz Center. We've continued to sort of push forward our agenda of applied science and academic excellence. We've done that in a number of different ways. Just to give you a few highlights from things that we've accomplished in the last year. We just hired our 4th Kretz postdoc. These are newly minted PhDs who do work at the interface of conservation, applied and basic conservation science. And that individual who will be joining us in the fall is a young woman from UC Riverside who will be working on fire ecology in the Santa Monica Mountains. And for those of you who happen to know that Pepperdine was closed yesterday because of a fire that was sort of nearby, and Canaan Road was also closed. I think we got the timing just about perfectly on hiring Alex as our next postdoc. We've funded now 28 PhD students at UCLA with our small grants program to help them enable their research in applied conservation science. We've had an ever-growing sort of group of people using our new field station that we opened a year and a half ago up on Mulholland. Through a very generous grant that we received from the LA County Board of Supervisors, we're going to be initiating probably early this summer building a new lab at the field station. That's a $500,000 project that will be starting, I hope, in June, assuming we can get all of our permits lined up and ready to go. So that's very exciting. And then finally, something that I'm really excited about, and a number of you in this room have been very involved with, our Kretz League, which is our outreach and public education group, has been growing, and it's a really wonderful unit or organization, whatever you want to call it, that we initiated just a little over a year ago. And what the league is all about is having people join. If you do join, your donation, be it $1 or $1,000, goes exclusively to funding the research of those graduate students and postdocs. We have several events a year. We go out on nature hikes. We all get to know each other, and we all get to brainstorm and think about how we can all save and work on the environment and the biodiversity of the Santa Monica's and the greater LA region. I believe we have some material out back if you'd like to join. Next weekend, Elizabeth Long, one of our Kretz postdocs, will be leading a butterfly walk in the Santa Monica's, so you can learn about the amazing, amazing butterfly diversity, one of the highest areas of butterfly diversity in the country, here in the Santa Monica's, how to identify those butterflies with one of the world's experts on our butterfly fauna. So think about joining, and if you're already a member, please join us, and then we'll go up to the field station afterwards and have a bite to eat. It's a lot of fun. Okay, those are the things I wanted to say and about the Kretz Center. Feeling very good about it, feeling very positive about what we've been able to accomplish and what we hope to accomplish in the coming year. Before I introduce today's speaker, Stan Gehrt, I'd just like to say a few things, and especially just thank a few people who have helped me. As those of you who know me know, are well aware, I have a very full life, and I don't always have time to take care of everything quite the way I should. And so for an event like this to happen and work well, of course, it takes lots of people who can ride herd on me. First and foremost is my administrative assistant, right-hand man, and general helper in all things, Mario Colon. Mario, where are you? Are you here? Mario's outside taking care of business. Anyhow, Mario is absolutely amazing, and I certainly couldn't be doing all this without Mario's very consistent help. Other folks from UCLA, there's a number of staff members at the Institute of Environment and Sustainability who have helped me a tremendous amount. Just one in particular for this event I'd also like to call out is Kate Thomas, who's been really wonderful. Here at Pepperdine, as I said, this is the first time we've ever done this at Pepperdine. We've always done it up at King Gillette before this. And the reason why this came about is that my colleague Lee Katz was hosting a meeting here, and Lee and I got to talking, and I said, you know, gosh, it would just be great to do it here. Pepperdine is such a beautiful place. We're developing a closer and closer partnership with Pepperdine. And Lee said, sure, we can do that. You know, you need a lecture room, you need a beautiful day, you need a gorgeous view. What the hell, we can do that, it's easy. So Lee, of course, then immediately turned it over to Ross Canning, his right-hand man. And of course, Ross sort of made it all happen. So Ross is another person who's been absolutely wonderful. And then finally, I just want to thank Gary Bucciarelli from my team at UCLA, who's also been instrumental in making this all work. So please join me in thanking all those folks. Okay, so by way of introduction, I read the LA Times every morning. I'm sure many of you do. And last Tuesday, so a few days ago, the LA Times ran an article on P22, the mountain lion who crossed a couple of freeways and has been residing in Griffith Park for the last 3 years. Seth Riley, who's I think the person who put a collar on P22, or his group did, is here and will be joining us afterwards for our panel discussion. Anyhow, they ran an article on it, and here's what they said. They said, Angelinos have an uneasy relationship with the wildlife in their midst. Bears who dare to lumber down from mountainsides into nearby towns are tranquilized or killed. Raccoons rummage through garbage and kill koi pond fish. Battles with coyotes are endless. Okay, true enough. And I think the coyotes are in particular the group that we wanted to to think about today and to try to understand coyotes both in and of themselves and also as a model for urban wildlife, human wildlife conflict, human wildlife interests, and how we can better manage wildlife in our urban setting, and how we can learn to live with and thrive alongside with wildlife in our urban setting. That was the goal and the mission of what we wanted to do in this year's public lecture. And once we thought about that, we decided that, absolutely without a doubt, Stan Gehrt from Ohio State University was the person to bring in to give us a lecture. Stan received his PhD at the University of Missouri at Columbia, where he worked actually on raccoons in South Texas. He's worked for many, many years as an expert on urban coyotes in Chicago. Stan has, I think, he'll tell us, I'm sure, but it's close to 800 coyotes marked and collared in the greater Chicago area, and has learned amazing things about how these, pretty large urban carnivores can make it and live in the urban matrix of Chicago, of Denver, of other cities around the world. And so what we wanted to do, and what we are doing, is to first bring in Stan to tell us about his work, to tell us about how these kind of amazing mid-sized carnivores can make it right in our midst, right in our yards, right amongst us, oftentimes without us even knowing about it. It's a wonderful set of stories and a wonderful research program. After Stan's talk, we've invited 3 other folks, Aaron Boynston from USGS, Seth Riley from the National Park Service, and Neve, I'm not going to remember Neve's last name, sorry. Quinn, thank you, Neve Quinn, who works with UC down in Orange County, to join us in a roundtable discussion about urban wildlife, urban carnivores, and the issues, plus and minus, that we might have with those members of our wildlife community after Stan's talk. And my hope is that sort of based on Stan's talk, based on the comments that our panel participants can give to you as well, we can get a bit of a discussion going so that people can voice their concerns or voice their interest in having urban wildlife right in their yard, which is what we have, and at least we at the Kretz Center would like to be able to promote. So that's the idea, that's the mission. Stick around for after Stan's talk, please, if you will, for this. It'll take probably another 20 minutes or half an hour, and should be a lot of fun. So with that, and without any further ado, please, folks, welcome with me Stan Gehrt.
Thanks, Brad, for that introduction and for inviting me here. So this is quite a pleasure. We've just gotten through a very late winter in Chicago, so it's been great to be able to feel a little bit of sunshine, so I appreciate that. Although we do have water in Chicago, so anyway, so as Brad mentioned, I'm very fortunate to be the PI on a long-term study of coyotes in Chicago. It didn't start out that way. We didn't intend, in fact, coyotes, as you'll see, coyotes were not a part of the fauna of Chicago originally, and it's a fairly recent phenomenon, not just in Chicago, but in other areas as well. But when it first happened, no one predicted it. We didn't see it coming, and we thought, well, this is going to be a one-year study. It'll be a one and done. We'll be lucky to catch a single coyote. It'll be a sick, mangy thing. It got confused. It got mixed up. It ended up in a city when it didn't want to go there, and that would be our study. So we were wrong, and I'll share some of the things that we learned about these animals. I won't have time to go through everything, but we'll touch on a few of the highlights, at least some things that might be relevant for you. Now, the first thing I want to address is the title. So, ghost dogs. That was actually I guess a term that I gave them back in 2006, and it got picked up by the media. But the reason why I considered them ghost dogs is that their success in urban landscapes, as well as pretty much every other landscape across North America, depends on their ability to hide from us. Because basically, at least most people with European descent, for some reason, really detest coyotes. They're hated pretty much everywhere. Their success is not a result of anything that we've done. They've done it all on their own. But it's dependent on their ability to hide from us. And so sometimes they do it well, sometimes they don't do it so well. And so I'll share some of that with you. But especially in the city, I want you to be thinking about this as I go through this presentation. I won't always refer to it, but that's the underlying theme here. They are trying to be ghosts while they're living among us. So what is a coyote? I just want to spend a couple minutes on this because everyone may not be quite on the same page. So they are a member of the Canidae family. That's the dog family. So it does include wolves, one of your foxes over here, gray foxes, and then the coyote and a red fox. So the coyote is one of our unique North American species. It emerged somewhere between 1 million or 1.5 million years ago. So it's been a distinct animal for quite a while. That doesn't mean that it doesn't occasionally interbreed with wolves or dogs, but it's been a coyote for a very long time. And they've been working around and with wolves for a very long time, as well as the foxes. More recently, we have another canid that sometimes is given its own species status and sometimes it's not. And in fact, one of the lab, the very famous lab at UCLA, has done a lot of work with this animal right here. So, and I'll let them defend the results that they've had, which is that that's a wolf right there. That is a wolf. So, and so we know genetically, at least right now, it's more or less most of the time we give it a subspecies status of a wolf. It's obviously all dogs came from wolves, but think about in terms of the relationships of these species with each other. They have rules that they follow when they occur in sympatry, or they occur together. So wolves kill coyotes, and coyotes kill foxes, and they all understand that. Those are the rules that they all work with. So what do you do with dogs? And what is that, really? So you can understand. I'm being generous here. So anyway, so coyotes, when they're living in a city, especially, they're seeing canids that they are trying to figure out exactly what those are. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. Now, coyotes in that family are a medium-sized species, so they're in between wolves and foxes, and in fact, they happen to be the perfect size for a carnivore, a mammalian carnivore. So they're right at that 40-pound range, and it turns out that 40 pounds is a really important weight energetically, because when you're smaller than that, you're pretty much destined to feed on small prey. If you're larger than that, if you're a wolf, you're destined to rely, at least most of the time, on large prey. But when you're at that 40-pound range, you can flip back and forth. And they are the primo generalist, which really serves them well in a variety of different habitat types. Plus, they're also both a predator and a prey. So when you are both predator and prey, you have to be really good at what you do. And it served them really well. So, and I should mention, voles and other small mammals make up most of their diet in most of the parts of North America, but they will switch quickly. So rabbits or hares will make up their diet, and even deer and larger animals. And in fact, I have a study over in Nova Scotia where we believe that they are taking moose. So when the conditions are right and they need to do it, they can take larger prey. So again, it serves them really well. This is a historic distribution, at least around 1600, and it's not entirely correct. So it's an amalgam of 4 or 5 different sources, and so each map will be slightly different. But the main thing here is that prior to European colonization, coyotes didn't occur in the eastern part of North America. They didn't occur in the Pacific Northwest, and most of Canada was absent coyotes. Today, this is their distribution, and that map is also out of date. In fact, my own study area doesn't have coyotes in it, but they actually go up to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. So all provinces in Canada now have coyotes, and you'll see they go all the way down to Panama. And in fact, I was in Costa Rica in November, and coyotes were on everyone's mind down there because they're finding coyotes everywhere. Now that they're using camera traps to do jaguar studies, they're finding that instead of jaguars, they're finding coyotes in the jungles, which they don't normally occur. So the last remaining habitat in North America is the city. And you may not know it here because coyotes apparently have been in LA from its inception. And so you've always had urban coyotes to deal with. But in the other parts of North America, it's a new phenomenon. So the whole success of coyotes, that expansion of their range, their colonization or their success or apparent success within cities is, to me, one of the most amazing wildlife stories in North America currently. Because again, they're doing that while facing tremendous persecution and I would say obstacles to overcome. So, and we'll talk more about that later. And so they're adjusting to urban landscapes in new and novel ways. So that's Portland. Obviously, that's probably a mistake that animal made. It's going to get a big surprise when it comes out. But they are occurring in cities. In Chicago, I mentioned that they were not a part of the urban fauna historically, and so one of the ways that that's reflected is in the number of nuisance coyotes that are removed from the Chicago area each year. So in Illinois, nuisance wildlife operators are required to report the number of animals that they remove as part of their operations annually. And so this isn't cumulative. This is each year is a different number. And so prior to the 1990s, it was very rare to have coyotes actually trapped as nuisance animals because there were no complaints. But you can see that during the decade of the 90s, that was the big decade. And so that's where we basically had an increase of over 1,000% of the number of animals that were actually trapped and removed. So that's not just complaints, that's actually action taken. And then you can see that it kind of tailed off there. 2000 is when we began our study, and we began our study in response to that. You can see what was occurring during that 10-year period. And again, it wasn't predicted. We didn't know that was going to happen. So this is my study area. So it's Chicago, so not quite as big as the LA metro area, but it's close. So we're at roughly about 9 million people. And this is the northwestern part of the metro area. So O'Hare is there. And in fact, O'Hare would be right here. And this is another way to look at it. So that's the road density and across that area. And so that's what coyotes are going to have to navigate if they're to be successful living in that landscape. And we'll talk about roads quite a bit. So as I mentioned, we began in 2000. We've been doing your standard stuff. We live trap animals. We ear tag them, and small pups will microchip. We also radio collar most coyotes using both what we call VHF and GPS collars. Capturing the animals is definitely the most challenging part of the research because we're using the same traps that fur trappers use, and so we absolutely cannot capture dogs or people. So it's a very bad thing. That would have stopped our study right away. And so it's hard to do. So here's just a few pictures of just processing animals. Again, so we take them back to a lab, and Justin Brown is one of the Seth's people who worked for quite a while on this project. There's one with a radio collar. So we follow these animals. If they have a typical radio collar like that, we have to have a team of people working day and night every week of the year, every year to follow these animals. And then we have the satellite collars to help us with special animals. We also collect blood for disease and genetic work from all of our animals. In addition to the trapping, then we also go into the dens each year. And so in fact, we're about to start doing that. And so for the next 6 weeks, we'll be tracking them intensively, looking for dens, and attempting to go into the den one time to microchip the young and draw a little bit of blood or hair for genetic samples. Again, to genetically test not only for disease and that type of thing, but also for their mating system and their social life, which hadn't been done before. So this is one of our litters. It's actually right behind a daycare facility. So that's actually, you can't see them, but there's a litter of 8 pups in that den, a couple of them there. That's a 4-week-old pup there. 5 weeks. You can see at 5 weeks they're beginning to see. One of the things that I find amazing about coyotes is their yellow eyes. And so you can see that from 4 to 5 they're starting to get those yellow eyes, and they're starting to become coyotes at that age. Another 5-week-old, they're developing personalities at that point, and then 6 weeks they turn into that ugly old coyote right there. So as Brad mentioned, we've been very fortunate. So we've continued since 2000, and so we're at over 880 animals. I think we're at 882 or so, and we've marked over 400 pups. Despite our best efforts, we have caught 2 dogs and 2 people. And I don't have time to go into those stories. But they're probably the best part of our research right there. So, no, we didn't process them. There were other things that happened on those days. So this is some of our results. I'm not going to show you a lot of graphs. So in terms of reproductive rate, it's higher than what you would find in a rural environment, and that's a reflection of resources. So coyotes are very good at adjusting their reproductive rate based on available resources or their own carrying capacity, and they'll evaluate their own carrying capacity. They'll determine how many coyotes are appropriate to be living in an area better than what we do. So that's so anyway, that's a litter of 11 pups, and so again, they're all from the same one mother, one father. They're definitely monogamous. Our genetic work has shown that even though they have many opportunities to cheat, they don't cheat. So an alpha pair will remain paired year after year after year. In fact, we don't have evidence of divorce in these guys. So they don't voluntarily break up. It's only upon the death of a mate. They'll take another one. So, but they can pull off a litter like that because they have help. The male tends to the litter just as much as the female, and they often have helpers. In an unhunted area, you can have fairly substantial group sizes or pack sizes, and those individuals will help raise the pups too. So there's another litter there too. So we average about between 8 and 9 pups per litter. And we do have some interesting genetic traits in some of our coyotes. That's actually that brindle is coming from a single male that has been successful year after year after year. So one particular part of the northwestern suburbs has brindle pups. We also have, we've documented 1 case of adoption. So this was a split litter. We actually had 5 of the older pup and 3 of the younger pups, and they're not coming from the same parents. They're still monogamous, so each set came from a single pair of coyotes, but only one pair of coyotes is raising those pups, and we don't know who the parents are of the younger pups. They just ended up in that den. So that stuff happens every now and then. So really quickly, again, as I mentioned, in an unhunted area, we tend to have pack sizes of large groups. Now, when I say pack for coyotes, it's different than pack for wolves. Wolves, they hunt and they travel together. Coyotes often spend a lot of time alone, and yet they're still a member of a pack. It's one of the more interesting aspects of coyote society. They have you would think it's loosely structured. It's not loosely structured. It's tightly structured spatial system and yet they're able to maintain these social bonds while still spending a lot of time alone. In the urban environment, their territory sizes get really small, less than 2 square miles, and then you have solitary coyotes that have left their groups of both sexes that can be much larger home ranges, up to 200 square miles in Chicago. So this is what it looks like spatially for one particular pack. So these red dots are the nighttime locations of an alpha male of a group that we call the Crabtree pack. And then the yellow dots are the daytime locations for that. So there's actually a group of coyotes there, anywhere from 4 to 5 typically, and he's one member of that. And you can see that the boundaries of that territory are very well defined. In fact, the coyotes pretty much draw their boundaries for us. And they'll often use the crevices or the marks across the landscape that we often create to make up the boundaries of their territory. So you can see that there are roads that are creating those boundaries, and yet those roads that coyote can easily cross almost any time he wants. But it's social boundaries that are keeping him from doing that. So they have, again, they're territorial, so they're excluding other coyotes from these other areas. They do this both directly but primarily non-directly, mainly through howling and marking. So the howling, I'm sure you have all heard coyotes howl. It's a very important part of that social bonding, and that's how they maintain their pack structure, because they spend a lot of time, again, separately. But it's also how they defend those territories. So for example, that guy is living next to another alpha male just south of there, another alpha male to the other side. Those are all packs. As you can see, they're exclusive, and so we're able to draw boundaries around those and identify the territories. And that's what we do day in and day out across that landscape. And so here's what it looks like in one particular year. And just to orientate you, O'Hare would be down here. So when you fly into O'Hare, you're flying into our study area. And I'm not showing you some of the others on the eastern side. I'll show you those later in just a second. And then on top of those, this very organized system of territories, we have these solitary animals. And again, that can be of males or females, and they're floating across the landscape, and they're just waiting for vacancies. And as soon as you remove coyotes from an area, they basically fill that void. And that's what the landscape looks like in Chicago today. And it's basically across the whole area. So a couple real quick coyote stories, if you don't mind, so it'll kind of give you an idea of what's going on with these animals. This is Coyote 21. He's been hit by a car. He was killed the night before we took this picture. He is an old animal. I caught him in the very first year of the study in 2000, and this is 11 years later. And so we tracked him for over a decade. And so it's interesting. So he lived in one of the urban parks, and what's happened during the course of our study is the coyote population has continued to grow dramatically. And this is how they grow. So here we have that park, and there are 2 colored dots there, and the dark blue ones are his locations that are taken during the course of a year, and then the pink dots are his mother's locations. So he's a teenager at this stage. He's over a year old, but he's still staying with his parents. And they're using almost that whole section of that park. And they did that for 2 years. And then something dramatic happened. He became sexually mature, so he couldn't stay with his mother anymore, and an unrelated pack took over part of their territory. So she moved to the north, he moved to the south, and then he ended up spending the whole rest of his life living in an area less than 1 square mile as an alpha male. So he had a pack, and they raised at least 7 litters in that little section right there. So now we fast forward to 9 years later. So those dark blue dots are still his, but now we have other packs living there. And in fact, 3 of those, the pink locations, the light blue, and the yellow, are all his adult offspring that all split off and became alphas. And so there's actually 4 packs there that are all closely related to each other. And that's how they split up these areas. They start dividing up the space. And today, this is what it looks like. And in fact, it's now the mother, now his mate, so he died. His mate stayed there for another 2 years, and now she's in the purple. Their adult offspring took over their territory. So now we have 8 packs. 8 packs where we used to have 1. And then it's not just in the parks. So these are all territories out in the matrix. These are what we call the really urban animals. So they don't have the benefit of large green spaces to live in exclusively. They have to live among people. And we didn't know that coyotes could do this. But now we have examples of this everywhere. And so I'll show you, this is the best example. So this is my favorite coyote. We try not to get too close, fond of them because they disappear if you do that. It's bad luck. So, but Coyote 1, she was immune to everything. So she was the coyote that started off the whole study. We caught her in March of 2000. This is us recapturing her 10 years later. Again, another very long-lived animal as an alpha female. That was a battle that we had at the trap. And so she took my glove and I duct taped her mouth shut. So, and then I had to carry her out. But then this is a better look for her. So that's actually a 11-plus-year-old coyote. So very old, extremely good health, extremely healthy. Had no evidence of any injuries, almost no parasites whatsoever. So really good shape. And this is where she lived. So she lived in the matrix. She lived in the neighborhoods. So in her first year, these are her locations, completely within those, but you'll see that they're clustering, and they're clustering in green spaces. So she's trying to avoid people while she's living with them. This is the next year, so they actually raised 5 different litters in this area. The next year, and then one of their adult offspring took over that part of the territory, and she and her mate moved over. Her mate, Melonhead, they met in 2003, and they stayed together throughout her whole life. This is Melonhead. He had a big head. And so these were her locations the last year that she was alive. She died of natural causes. So she was never hit by a car, even though she was crossing roads every single day of her life. Coyote 21, on the other hand, that I showed you earlier, who got hit by a car, was living within a nice big green space. And so he rarely crossed roads, and that cost him. So, and then this is Melonhead's location. So you can see that these mated pairs are really tight together. They were a very close pair. Some pairs are a little closer than others. They remind me of people in a lot of cases. Marriages. There's some marriages that work very well when there's a lot of separation, and then there's some marriages that work better when they're together all the time. And so they were better together all the time. She died, and then what happens a lot of times is when one of the mates dies, then the other one leaves and vacates that territory. So Melonhead, for the first time in a decade, left that area and moved to an area behind a super Walmart. And so this is his area behind a super Walmart as a 12-year-old. And then this was him. This was a Canadian film crew that came to film our coyotes. They wanted to document some of the research. And I said, well, the best example would be Melonhead, because he's living in this little marsh. And he has to come out. There's only one place where he can come in and out. So they set up a blind, and this is 75 yards away, the very first morning that they set it up. And he already saw the videographer before the videographer saw him. And again, this is an old coyote, you can tell. And yet he's still, even though he's been living within a few yards of people his whole life, he is still showing a healthy fear of people. So not all coyotes become habituated. He never became habituated to any great degree. So in fact, this is the best look that videographer got for the rest of the week, was this one. And then he only saw him briefly one other time. And then he's going to disappear like a ghost. So you saw that they occasionally do get hit by cars. And so that is the most common form of mortality for them. And it'll vary somewhat from year to year, but it's always the dominant form because they have to cross so many roads. And so that is the biggest challenge to them. But it turns out that their survival rate is actually quite high. In fact, it's anywhere from twice to more than 5 or 6 times greater than rural coyotes, especially coyotes that are getting hunted and trapped. But the question that we had, and this is one of the mechanisms for their success apparently in the city, is their ability to cross roads, or at least be able to work among roads. And so we weren't sure if they were adjusting to that or not. So we did this a couple different ways, but the simplest way was to simply look at survival of coyotes that are exposed to different road densities. So here we have 6 different packs or territories. They have different levels of roads in their territories. O'Hare is right here. And so the question is, do these guys have a higher survival, or at least a less chance of getting hit by a car than, say, this guy or this girl over here? And so we can test that. So again, if there's no adjustment, if they're not learning about traffic patterns, then as you increase road density, the survival rate should go down, or at least the risk of getting hit by a car should go up. And if they are making adjustments, then you shouldn't see any change in survival no matter where they occur in that landscape. I meant to take this out. So this is a stupid science slide. But the null model is the one that says that basically no factors, not the road density, not sex, not social status, not age, and some other variables that we measured, play any role in explaining survival. So in other words, coyotes do adjust. And I'll show you what that looks like right now. So for example, just anecdotally, this little green area right here, that's the home range of coyote number 1. She lived for a decade there. That's a great example of how they make adjustments. The biggest challenge is to go into downtown Chicago, and that's what they're doing now. So these are the GPS locations of a coyote that actually, as of just a few months, is living in downtown Chicago. So that's Navy Pier. This is the Loop. So Sears Tower and that type of thing would be right there. And you can see the location. So she's clearly living in the most dense part of Chicago. This is just a close-up of that area. And this is her crossing roads. So when you live in downtown Chicago as a coyote, you have to use sidewalks and streets just like everyone else. And you have to also become nocturnal. So she is active at night, and this is Justin's video actually on one little night of following her. So here she's going to cross the road in front of the vehicle, and you can see that there's no traffic on this road, so that's not really a challenge, and frankly it's not very exciting. But it's about to get more exciting here in just a second, because she's going to cross a very busy road right now. So here she's going down the street like coyotes do. You'll see traffic up here. When she gets over to that sidewalk, she's going to start turning her head to the left. She's doing it right now. And she's looking in the direction of the traffic. She sees what she's looking for right away. And so she crosses immediately. So she didn't hesitate, and that was her strategy on that particular moment, and it was successful. Now I'm going to show you a completely different strategy, the same coyote in a different area. This is Fullerton Avenue, intersection of Fullerton Avenue. You're going to see a cyclist coming by staring at us because we have this great big antenna sticking up out of the truck. Right behind him is this adult female watching the traffic. She sees that they're stopped at a and you can see that she used a completely different strategy. So she knew that the traffic was going to stop. She just had to wait. And so then you can see as she makes her way down that way, you can see people walking around. This is early in the evening, and yet they'll never know that that coyote was there, just like a ghost. So she shares that space with 750,000 people. That's how many people live in her territory, 750,000. So now we're doing more work with coyotes in the urban core. So we're using GPS collars to get a better idea of their locations because it's impossible to follow them ourselves. We use a new technique to look at their diet because we can't find scats, which is the old technique, in the downtown area for one reason or another. We still don't understand why we can't find coyote poop down there, but it's pretty hard to find. And then in terms of how they move, critter cam, cameras on the coyotes. I'll show you those in just a second. And then I'm not going to talk about their personality stuff, but that's what we're kind of excited about right now. So here's what it looks like. You can see the road density as we move across that landscape. It goes from a fairly open road, kind of, to really dense. And then these are our urban core animals there. So you can see that their landscape looks a lot different. This is one of those animals, so they're extremely healthy. That's the other thing. People assume, well, any animal that's living down there has got to be sick or injured or young or stupid or whatever, but they're not any of those. And so here's a comparison in territory size. So one of the things they have to give up when they move into the city is they have to increase their home range size. So these are the typical home range sizes of coyotes out in the suburbs, and then these are the home range sizes with the same scale in the city. And so basically they're increasing their territory size, but they have to do it because there's large sections of their territories that are unavailable to those animals. So the question is, are they still maintaining the same amount of green space or not, which is what we're looking into now. So this is what it looks like from a road perspective. And so again, these are the high density areas. And this is just a close-up of those and an aerial. So there's basically no open space. In fact, what's really interesting, and you can see that they're still territorial, we could actually overlap that with, you can get online and look at the current territorial boundaries of gangs in Chicago on the south side. So humans also are territorial. And so we mark off territories, and so they're just doing the same thing that we do. This is what it looks like for one of those animals. This was just this past week. He's, let me see, he's right there. And this is the only space where he can, this is actually a railroad. He's right there. His head just moved. He's watching the jogger. So he's right there. You'll see his ears move. Yes. Right. So that's what they do during the day. So again, just like a ghost. This is 748, a great male living next to Soldier Field, if you know the football team. So Soldier Field actually, I'll do this, is right there. And the Field Museum is right there. And so this is where he's been living. They had a litter right there. This is where they had their litter on top of a parking garage next to Soldier Field. And this is their litter. So I mentioned that they have to become nocturnal. So here's what it looks like in terms of movement rates. So these are hours of the day. So the daytime hours are in the middle, and the nighttime hours are toward the ends. And urban core would be red. These would be the really urban animals. And then the blue would be the matrix. Those are still living with a lot of people. But the green are the ones that are living in the large natural areas. So they have more typical coyote activity. But you can see that all the coyotes have to follow the same pattern when they move into the city. In terms of diet, using the traditional technique, these are the different diet items. And we thought that the bottom two would be the ones at the top when we began the study, and we were wrong, as usual. And so most of their diet, and these won't add up to 100% because these are overall averages over the course of the year. So these numbers fluctuate based on availability. Like fruit is available during the summer, but not during the winter. But we were concerned that we might be missing some anthropogenic or human food because, I don't know, Brad, but I don't know what French fries or donuts look like when they come out of you, but they're probably hard to identify. Okay, they are. All right, so we're probably missing some of those, right? We can look at stomach content. So this is the contents of a single stomach of your typical coyote. So that's 9 rodents on that animal, so of roadkill animals. But a better technique now that we just began using is stable isotopes, which is we take a single whisker from a coyote, we just snip it, and then we can section it off into different sections. We can usually get 10 to 12 sections per whisker. In each one of those sections, we can analyze for diet items, and then we can actually follow their diet over time. And so carbon, it's usually split up into nitrogen and carbon. Carbon is the isotope we're interested in because that reflects our food. So we have a particular type of carbon in our corn-based food. And so when their carbon signature drifts over into these values, that's over into the human area. When it's over in these values, it tends to be more natural prey. Each one of these colored dots is an individual coyote, and you'll see variability with each of these individual animals, but you'll see that most of them are over on the natural side, but there are some coyotes that are over on the human side, so they are eating some human food. In fact, all of those red dots now are all those urban animals. So some level of human food seems to be giving them a purchase in that particular area. So for example, that coyote was seen eating fast food. So even the best coyotes, even coyote number 1, couldn't resist McDonald's French fries. So real quick, just in terms of some of the things that we learned, I don't want to go over all these, but the biggest thing, largely nocturnal, which helps them attain that ghost status. They largely avoid our foods, which also helps them avoid us. They maintain a highly structured social system, which surprises a lot of people. We still don't know how they choose their mates, but for most of them, whoever they choose as their mate, that's going to be the only individual they mate with for the rest of their life. So it's a pretty amazing thing to look at that. And then few nuisance coyotes, which I want to touch on for just a minute. So most of our coyotes don't cause problems. Through 2011 at least, only 5% of the animals actually living in the matrix generated any comments whatsoever. It's only 5%. That doesn't even mean that they were causing an issue. For example, this animal generated complaints. This is a nuisance coyote, even though the coyote had not conflicted with anyone. In fact, you're going to see it interact with the dog here in just a second. And it's going to be typically what we see at night, too. Right about now, right there. That's their interaction with the dog, right there. And here's the dog. And that goes on every single night. So every one of these coyotes that's having to try and get from one green space to another is having to try and negotiate these areas, and they're actually trying to avoid dogs as much as possible. Eventually, some of them flip over and they cause a problem. You'll see it uses the sidewalk and stares at the dog, just like a good coyote. The other thing I mentioned is that we're also doing critter cam work, and so this is where, let me see, here we're working with National Geographic to put a camera on coyotes and let them do the video recording so that we can get an idea of what they're looking at. So this is the first time a critter cam has been used on a coyote, so we had to test it on a captive animal. In fact, we know that animal. I don't know if Justin's and Allison are here, but that's Yoder, 8 years later. So a great animal. He wasn't real thrilled about this part, but he was very, very nice to me. So we use this now to try to, again, see some of the things that they see. And this is what it looks like. So this is on a captive animal, and we just put some stuff out there for him to interact with. And so then the goal is to try and put this on free-ranging coyotes. This is actually Yoder taping the National Geographic guy. So here they are recording each other, which I think is kind of cool. So here's one of the animals that we just put it on. I need to do this. Oh, this is actually our downtown animals. So here, actually the lens kind of fell down a little bit, so it slid down, so it's a little blurry, but you can still see that this is a female, and she's looking at the traffic, and she wants to cross that road. So she's watching it, and what she's actually doing is she's waiting for her mate, the male, to come, and they'll cross together. So you can see and get an idea that when they cross roads, they're watching traffic for a very long time. They're very careful about it. So here, there's a break. She's going to move a little closer. She's going to stop. She's in a better spot now, so she can watch the traffic a little better. You can see the cars. There's her mate. And she's waiting for him to go. Looking both ways. And then they go. And then she's really running. So you can, they're going really fast. That's because they're actually going down the street. street, and she's going to move over to the sidewalk, and they'll slow down a little bit. So here she goes over to the sidewalk. But it's opening up whole new windows into what these guys do. So, this is actually eating. So we can also verify kind of what their diet is. Anyone know what that is? It's a squirrel. It's easy to confuse them because the head's gone. So we also not only get to see what they eat, but we get to see how they eat. And so we're learning all kinds of things. Like we know that they don't like feathers. So we haven't documented them catching. Oh, here he only ate half of the squirrel, so he's going to cache it. So coyotes cache their food. So this is him carrying the rear end of the squirrel. And it took him, we were editing this, it took him about 15 minutes to find the right spot. So he tried different spots, and he needs to find a spot that's hidden from his cohorts, and so he finally finds a spot after quite a while. So this is kind of a side project that's a pretty interesting and neat part of it. And this is him actually digging a hole. You'll actually see a hole start to appear down below. That's the shaking is the digging. He's going to place that squirrel in the hole. See the hole's getting bigger down below. And here it goes. Yep. And then he uses his nose, just like a dog, to cover it back up right now. So not exactly great science there, but it's kind of neat anyway. We spent a lot of years exploring the relationships between coyotes and these species. So coyotes aren't just living on the landscape eating our food or our pets. We already established that, so they're doing other things. That means that they're probably having an impact in certain ways. And so I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to touch on a couple. First of all, we've radio collared and monitored many other species, such as raccoons, skunks, gray foxes, and cats. That's feral cats, unowned cats. And here's how many were killed by coyotes. That's 1.5%. So actually only a couple raccoons were killed. So they're not having much of an impact on these species. In fact, skunks are dominant over coyotes. But with foxes, that would be higher if we had more foxes, but they've already whacked a bunch of them. But foxes definitely avoid them. And cats, a lot of people would assume that that's even greater for feral cats, but it's low because there's really, really strong avoidance. So cats learn where coyotes are living. So we did a lot of work with these cats, and I don't have time to show you all of this. These are cats that were taken by coyotes. It's pretty obvious. But most of them are avoiding, so they're having ecological impacts out there. And then Justin did a great work as a grad student where he looked at this relationship. Geese, Canada geese specifically, are a problem in many Midwestern or Eastern cities. They've become overabundant because they don't migrate anymore. We did a lot of monitoring of nests, so each one of these are goose nests. Over 200 nests are monitored, and about half of those were taken by predators. Justin's job was to document what was a predator, and it turns out it was almost always coyotes. So here we have nest success, less than 20% in natural areas. 80% of the nests are in this category. Only 20% are in these categories. So they're definitely having an impact. In fact, this is what it looks like. So Justin had to put video cameras on the nests. And it was really hard. Justin actually built the cameras because they had to be spy cameras. Here's a pair of geese defending a nest from a predator. So you'll see them a little bit better here in just a second. So it's infrared. That's why it's gray and grainy. So the predator is moving around outside of our field of view. It'll come around back and we'll see it. You can see the goose response. It's not a coyote. It's about to become a raccoon. And you'll see it in just a second. You'll see the goose response, whack. And so they whacked the crap out of raccoons. But then when a coyote comes in, the same pair, watch closely. So geese can't defend their nests from coyotes. It's really the only predator that they can't, in Chicago, that they can't defend their nests from. And so coyotes have the free reign. And goose eggs are a nice, nutritious meal. We call them the natural fast food because they're already packaged. You can just take them and go. And so they always take them somewhere else. And sometimes they'll eat them and sometimes they'll cache them, which is another thing that Justin and Allison found. In this case, that egg in particular was, Justin actually cabled that to the ground. So the one thing I want to point out about this particular, so it turns out that this is having an impact on their growth rate of the goose population. So you'll see, he'll try and take the egg. This particular predation event, it's occurring across Chicagoland among 9 million people, and yet no one had documented this. So this is a good example of the ecological impacts that coyotes can have that we are completely unaware of. It's going on, it's going to be going on here in the next few weeks, and most people will never see this. In fact, it took Justin about 3 years to document that. So real quick, the thing that we're working on right now is deer. Another white-tailed deer become overabundant in urban areas. They're a real issue in terms of management because they can't hunt in there. Fawn survival is a way that coyotes can possibly impact them. So we went back to this area where we have this really huge density of coyotes. There's also a high-density deer population, and we began looking specifically at the fawns. And so just in the last 2 years, we've been marking fawns as soon as they're born. It's very difficult to do, but we try to get to them before the coyotes do. The first year we had 21% survival. That's after only 18 days. So they were getting hammered, and all of the mortality was coyote related. All of the mortality was coyote. And then the second year, their survival was 67%. And so the difference is actually alternative prey. So when there's a big small mammal population, that actually reduces the coyote's attention toward fawns. But when the small mammals crash, the fawns pay a price. So that's all I have time for right now. But I just want to point out a couple things to come back to this ghost dog metaphor. So coyotes are successful in the Chicago area, and I believe in most urban areas, not because of people, but in spite of them. We don't help them. They haven't been protected anywhere that I'm aware of. In fact, in many cases, people are given incentives to get rid of them, and then get rid of them in many different ways, and yet they still are successful. Their success, again, relies on their ability to stay hidden from us. As with most long-term studies, many people are involved in this, and so I want to especially acknowledge some of the people that are in here, Justin and Allison Brown. They were both grad students in this project, and they worked on this as well as many others. And then, of course, we've had great support from many agencies. Thank you.
So I lived in Chicago for 7 years. I used to be down in the Loop all the time. I lived on the South Side. Who knew? It's pretty darn cool. Okay, what I'd like to do now is invite our group to come up, Stan included, and just please come up and join us. I think we're going to do this rather than have immediate questions with Stan. You can ask him questions afterwards. And once again, we have our 4 panelists, including Stan, who you've heard from, Aaron, Seth, and Neve. And what I'd like to do is just for a minute, ask everybody, I guess we've heard from Stan, but certainly the other 3, and Stan can pipe in if he wishes. First, just to quickly sort of introduce yourself, just for a minute or two, who you are, who you work for, what your job is about with respect to urban wildlife issues in Southern California. And then maybe just to start the conversation, tell us kind of what your current sort of favorite issue is with urban wildlife and people in LA. What do you think is the most sort of compelling or important question that you're curious about right now? So I don't know, why don't we start with Aaron and then work our way across.
I'm Erin Boydston. I'm a research ecologist with USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. I did my undergraduate work at Duke University and have my PhD from Michigan State. For my dissertation, I studied spotted hyenas, and I was interested in spotted hyenas because they're social mammals, and I had a sort of a lifelong interest in primates and animals that live in these complex, large, stable social groups. And so hyenas do this, and they're unique among carnivores in having this kind of primate-like society. But it was from studying them for a couple of years, living in a tent and watching them almost daily, I got interested in carnivores in general and seeing the common patterns across carnivores and issues and challenges for their conservation and the attitudes towards them, whether they're in parks or outside of parks. So that sort of drew me to carnivores in general, looking at these patterns that were common to different continents and species and cultures. So that drew me to my position at USGS, where I've been studying mostly bobcats in Orange County for a while and coyotes as well, and looking at how these animals deal with these really highly fragmented, complex, much more heavily urbanized landscapes with a lot more people on them. A new issue, a wildlife issue I think is important, is simply studying some of the stuff we haven't yet, and including species we haven't looked at. So I have a new project looking at mule deer, with the, sort of a basic question of, are freeways barriers to their movements, just as has been documented for some of the larger mammals here and a few other species. We want to ask that question of the mule deer, so we'll be doing that, looking at their genetics, and this is non-invasive sampling, so we'll be simply picking up poop and comparing that across this region. Santa Monica is down into Orange County as well.
Okay, I'm Seth Riley, and I'm a wildlife ecologist with the National Park Service here in the Santa Monica Mountains at Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, and I'm also adjunct at UCLA in ecology and evolutionary biology. I've actually basically always been interested in and done urban wildlife research and conservation. So after I was an undergraduate, I worked in DC, where I'm from, on raccoons and various species in DC, and then as a graduate student, I worked in the Bay Area in Marin County in sort of urban and rural areas on bobcats and foxes. And then I've been, since 2000, I've been here at the park studying wildlife in general, but basically, since we're right here next to Los Angeles, all of the work that we do is focused on understanding what are the effects of urbanization and fragmentation on wildlife. And we do that with lots of different groups, carnivores especially. So we've been studying bobcats for about 20 years now, since 1996. We did a 9-year study of urban coyotes, and then we've been studying mountain lions since 2002, but we also do stuff with other groups, reptiles and amphibians. And again, all that is focused on understanding what are the effects of urbanization and fragmentation on wildlife. One thing, so we've learned a number of things. I guess one thing that's gotten a fair amount of attention that I'll mention just in recent years is we've seen a lot of exposure in wildlife, especially in carnivores, to toxicants, specifically anticoagulant rodenticides. And that's been something that's been really interesting to see how widespread that is, basically in everything that we've looked at, and it's probably in all kinds of things that we haven't looked at yet. So that's been something interesting, and there's been a lot of interest and attention in sort of changing regulations and things about that. So.
Hi, I'm Neve Quinn. I'm the new Area Vertebrate Pest Advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I'm based at the South Coast Research and Extension Center in Orange County in Irvine. I'm obviously not from around here. I have my PhD from the National University of Ireland in Galway, where I studied small mammal population dynamics in the hillsides in the west of Ireland. And I've always been interested in human-wildlife conflict, but more on the small mammal end of things. I've worked in agriculture in Ireland, in California, and in Southeast Asia, where I looked at some ecologically based rodent management techniques. So as Seth mentioned, you know, there is these issues with secondary toxicity. So while in Southeast Asia, we looked at different ways to manage rodents without using toxicants like the second generation anticoagulants. I'm obviously new to California, and it's definitely a steep learning curve, but I'm getting more acclimatized to all the human-wildlife conflict issues that are occurring here. We don't have coyotes in Ireland, we do not have mountain lions, we do not have bobcats. We do have lots of human-wildlife conflict, especially because we have this very large agricultural area in Ireland, and a lot of the wildlife depend on this area. So a lot of the issues that I'm getting to know in Orange County specifically is problems with coyotes taking pets. We obviously have huge feral cat populations in Orange County as well, so we have problems with flea-borne typhus in Orange County, and that's something that I find very interesting. We don't know an awful lot about things like urban possum ecology down here, so I'm very interested in all sorts of things.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a couple microphones around. True or false? Yes. We also have this is slipped. So with that, I would just say, anybody have any questions? Questions for Stan about his talk? Questions for our other panelists? Let's get those microphones going. Robert, thanks.
Stan and everyone, thank you for the talk. A couple of questions and comments. Thank you for the presentation, because when I saw the picture of Wrigley Field a few years ago with the Coyotes, having lived in Chicago, I'm thinking, that's insane. And now thank you for going into more detail about that. What you started on at the beginning of the presentation, I was going to now ask if you could elaborate on how the coyotes or coyotes, how do they assimilate other animals which don't quite fit in to the hierarchy? And maybe someone else will know in the panel. And I'm basing this on a few years ago here in the San Fernando Valley. Coyotes early in the morning, you see them with bunnies and all their things, and they do glide like ghosts. You see them very, very sleek and wonderful. We had a real issue, though, where they were coming down in packs, where they were jumping on fences and stuff, too. You'd have 2 or 3 coyotes, but you'd have 3 or 4 wild dogs. It's really strange to see a wild, dirty, standard poodle running with coyotes. Do you have any studies or anybody know of anything? How do you get assimilated into a pack versus eaten? And then, is this an issue too, or not anything which you've even started studying? And thank you.
So you mean, when you say assimilate, you mean actually assimilating into their social pack? Right. So we thought something like that might actually occur in our coyotes, and so far we've never ever seen that. In fact, they're again pretty rigid. However, there have been cases in other parts of the country where there's been the occasional dog that's been accepted, but usually it's not a well-defined social pack. So in one case in Iowa, there was a black lab that actually was able to join. It wasn't a pack; it was a single other coyote, and they started a group from that. So there wasn't a pack that lab joined; it was a single coyote. But then they produced some others. So there are some weird circumstances why that particular coyote assimilated with that lab. We will never know. Obviously, that particular coyote had low standards. So I mean, I don't have anything against labs. They're cute dogs and everything, but coyotes, I mean, come on. Come on. So most of them, and I kid around about that, but generally when you watch the coyotes, they not only have standards as far as other species, but they have them for themselves. I mean, they're very picky about, so we're very interested in how other coyotes can join existing packs, and it's not common for that to happen. It's for unrelated animals to join an existing pack. It occurs, but only about 10% of the time.
Okay.
I don't know if that's similar to.
Yeah,
Sure,
we never
that's great.
saw any assimilation of dogs with coyotes in our study, at least.
John?
Hi. So I had also 2 simple questions. One for Seth. That's whether, in your studies, you think that Stan's general findings, would be true in the LA area. And the second one is whether, since coyotes are not since cats are avoiding coyotes, so they're not prey, they're not managing to kill these feral cats. Is there any evidence that just by kind of making cats avoid these areas, that might have any beneficial impact on songbird populations or other bird populations?
So first of all, yeah, so we studied coyotes for 9 years, from 1996 to 2004 here in the Santa Monica Mountains and the Simi Hills, and the answer is we saw essentially exactly the same kinds of things. So basically, coyotes are, as much as possible, using natural areas and eating natural food. So we also saw, as Stan mentioned, very low percentages of human-related foods, and very low percentages, at least in terms of in the scat, in terms of whether they were eating them, of domestic cats. We also found a similar thing where they were becoming more nocturnal when they were more urban. We also found very small home ranges relative to non-urban coyotes, so we found very similar things. And then, Stan can talk too. He's done some really interesting work on the cat-coyote relationship, or just on cats in general. But we found, like I said, we found very low percentages of cats in the coyote diet, which doesn't mean coyotes aren't killing cats, and it doesn't mean it's not a big deal for every individual cat owner that happens to. I mean, that clearly does happen. What it says to us is that is not a major part, as Stan was showing too in Chicago, of what's keeping those coyotes going. So.
Yeah, as far as the cats, in fact, we've done more monitoring of cats than what I presented here. So it's almost 200 cats that we've followed. And again, I want to reiterate that it's unowned cats. So that's the kind of mortality rate of truly feral cats. Now, indoor-outdoor cats that come in and out, I can't really say, but I would imagine that their vulnerability is higher because they simply don't know as much as what's going on out there. And that may be where you have a higher incidence of coyote attack. But that doesn't mean that the other thing that we noticed, I kind of mentioned it briefly, that we believe that there's coyote personalities and there's differences in what they're searching. And in fact, that diet graph that I showed you showed actually members of the same pack. I went through it too quick, that are eating different things. And so you can have a single coyote all of a sudden, for one reason or another, develop a taste for cat. And for that particular neighborhood, that coyote may go through and wipe it out. Or the pack could do that as well. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. It helps the birds. So the other thing is that we did look at prey-based stuff, or the native birds, herps, and mammals at those sites. We actually had an experimental design with cats. And what we found is that basically there was essentially no real cat predation occurring that we could document in those natural areas where the coyotes live. So, which other people have found too.
Someone get a microphone. Yep.
Yes, then I have a question. You said coyotes know how to regulate their fertility to match their resource base, yet you showed one park, I guess it was a park, where you start off with one pair, and then their offspring, and anyway, you ended up, I think, with 8 pairs in the same area. So could you explain how that statement that you made that I just repeated is consistent with what went on in that park?
Sure, so that's a great question, and thanks for clarifying that. So you're right, so that density in that park and other parks like it has continued to go higher and higher, and to the point now where we regularly radio collar in that area 30 to 40 coyotes in one park. So very high densities, but clearly all indications are that the food base can sustain that. So they simply haven't hit the carrying capacity. That's what that's saying. And in our small mammal trapping, so we have monitored the prey in that park, and the small mammal abundance is unbelievable. So it's actually voles that are driving those coyote numbers for the most part. So thanks for asking. Voles, V-O-L-S.
Little native mammals, little native rodents.
Little
Yeah.
cute little things.
Yep.
Thank you. I would like to know what the coyotes are saying to each other. I live in the canyon area near here, and every night there are probably from 2 to 7 episodes of long howling. And there are different patterns of their conversations, and one of them, I'm not a coyote, but it's a long alpha call, woo, and then a few seconds after that, there come in a lot of little yip, 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 yip. And then after that, there's chaos. There's and
Wow.
what on earth are they saying? What are they saying? I'm sitting there listening to them. Like it's amazing. It's so tribal and so atavistic. So tell me what they're doing.
Seth, that's yours.
I mean, the one thing I'll say,
I want to hear.
the one thing I'll say is that everyone assumes that, oh, we hear the coyotes and they're going crazy, they must be like tearing apart, and absolutely not. That is absolutely not the case. But Stan, you know more about this probably than I do.
You're right. So that is a great impression.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah.
She deserves that. That is so awesome. And you're right, that's pretty much how it starts. So that whole vocalization, we actually had a PhD student that worked on that in particular. And so it was fascinating, and we did some experiments with them, some really interesting tests. And so there's a lot of stuff that's going on. We don't know. You're asking me what's going on in their head, in addition to what they're saying to each other. So we don't know, but we do know the functions of that. So when they start a howling bout, what you're hearing often, in fact, most of the time, it started by the alphas. So usually the alphas start the howling bout. Almost never do pups start that. So that first sound that you're hearing, that's one of the adults making that sound. And then the younger animals will join. Now the high yipping sometimes are the pups, but also the adults can make the high yipping too. So it's not always that, but they're joining as well. And so to the best of our knowledge, and this is based on some of the experiments we've done, they're both communicating with each other, and then they're also communicating with they're sending signals to their neighbors. So they're communicating with each other. So every coyote territory has rendezvous sites, which I didn't talk about, but the rendezvous sites is where they come together. Because I said that they often are hunting alone, and yet they're maintaining this social structure. They're defending this territory. At some point, they have to get together. So imagine if you have multiple dogs that you own, more than one dog, and you take one of those dogs away, and then let's say it has to go spend the night at the vet or something, and you bring it back. What happens to the other dogs? I mean, what happens when they come back? I mean, they sniff and they lick each other over all kinds of body parts, right? And they're wagging their tails and they're so happy. So if you could see a video of a rendezvous site, that's what you would see, is that these animals coming together. So you'll often hear that those bouts occurring at the same general area. That's a rendezvous site. Now it may change over time, but for that time, that's a rendezvous site. So they're bringing the clan together to do their communicating and that type of thing. They're just happy to be together. The other thing is that they are advertising to other packs that they are present. And one of the things that the student was able to do was she was able to determine through, I'm not going to go through the process, but to determine that coyotes can count. And so they can count, when they hear that bout, they know how many coyotes are making those sounds. We're lousy at counting them, but the coyotes are actually really good. And so all the other coyotes, both the neighbors, the resident neighbors, as well as those solitary animals that are floating through, they're hearing that, and so now they know that this territory is occupied by 5 coyotes or 6 coyotes or something like that. So that's what's going on. So, and then there's other things. I didn't have time to show you. We had this great clip of a howling bout where Coyote 125, she had her pups on one side of the road. She crossed the road without them. They didn't want to cross the road. They got so mad. They were making these sounds. And then she eventually, so one of them was yip howling, clearly frustrated. She eventually came back to them. And when she came back to them, all hell broke loose. So it was that big raucous thing. And and it seemed to us as very anthropomorphic, but I don't care. And it was like they were so happy that she came back, but they were mad too. So anyway, yeah.
There you go. Okay, let's get somebody from in here on the aisle who's got a microphone. Yep.
How do the coyotes
Oh, okay.
interact
Sorry.
with I suppose mid-sized cats like bobcats were mentioned, like sharing their range, maybe mountain lion, maybe lynx, because like perhaps they share the same prey.
Did you catch that?
Sorry, I didn't. So what was the question?
Sorry,
So
could
the
you repeat the
relationship-
question?
Okay, how do the coyotes interact with other mid-sized predators that are felines, perhaps like bobcats or mountain lions that maybe share their prey or even share the same niche, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have definitely followed bobcats, coyotes, and mountain lions in this general area, and the answer is they definitely all overlap broadly with each other, so they definitely are coexisting. They do sometimes kill each other, so the bigger ones kill the other ones. So mountain lions definitely sometimes kill coyotes. I mean, the mountain lions, by far, the most common prey item is deer, but the second most common thing that we've seen is coyotes, so that we do see some of that, although it doesn't seem to be having much of an effect on the coyote population. Again, there's plenty of coyotes within mountain lion home ranges. And then coyotes will also sometimes kill bobcats, especially smaller bobcats, females, or younger males. Again, it's not causing a major effect on the bobcat population, it doesn't look like. And then probably, it's been documented, we haven't seen it, but probably mountain lions are also sometimes killing bobcats, although we haven't specifically documented that.
Aaron, you're Ms. Bobcat. You got, what's your take on that, and especially in sort of, if you have it on open space, on wildlands versus more urban places? Any comments on that?
Right, we've, the work we've done in Orange County is mostly in areas where there were not mountain lions, so we didn't have the mountain lion component, and not a lot of it did we look directly at bobcats and coyotes together, but it just brought sort of one small anecdote where we looked at radio-collared bobcats, GPS-collared bobcats and coyotes, looking at movements across freeways between Santa Ana Mountains, Chino Hill State Park, and Prado Basin, and there were lots of underpasses in that area, and we did find that bobcats and coyotes that were moving under the freeways were using the same underpasses a lot and avoiding the same ones. And there was one set of underpasses that only bobcats used that we didn't think any animals would use, but coyotes weren't, and it was actually, there were some capped culverts that are, sort of the tube comes underneath so you can enter at one end, but the other end is a sort of a stovepipe that comes out, so bobcats are able to use those, and that sort of looks like in that area it's a good chance that there's places where the animals can avoid each other if they want, but otherwise that, we haven't looked, I think we need to do a lot more work looking in sort of areas as urban as where Stan's work has been done. So we've sort of started in the open spaces and kind of made our way into more urban areas as the animals have led us there. But that's sort of hopefully on the horizon.
Do bobcats make it into really, really urban places the way coyotes do?
When there's some sort of green space and habitat there and connectivity, so they they can use pretty narrow little green spaces, but I think there has to be something that has brought them into those spaces. But yeah, they'll be on the edges or where there's little green belts between houses and other development.
Gotcha. Well, and I'd like to take my prerogative as one of the guys sitting up here and ask, so, just like to hear what Neve has to say and others. That, there's this whole community, right, of bobcats and coyotes and conceivably lions, and they're eating small stuff. They're eating rodents. And do you have any insights? I was very surprised, actually. I thought when Stan was going to talk about coyotes, as you say, or coyotes, as I say, eating rodents, it was all going to be rats. It was all going to be introduced rats and house mice, not native voles. And I was kind of disappointed at that, actually, because I thought, well, here's a great form of rodent control. We just want to have these predators in our cities, and it'll be a win-win because everybody hates rats. So, Neve, what's your take on that? Do you think that you've worked a lot on small rodents?
Yeah, well, in Orange County, funny enough, there are no Norway rats. So I don't know, has that anything to do with any kind of predation? Because the roof rats spend a lot of their time quite high up
Yep.
So their niche is quite, high up, as opposed to the Norway rats that spend quite a lot of time down. Now, I have no idea why there are no Norway rats in Orange County. It's very, very interesting, but that could be something that's going on there. And I mean, we do have quite a lot of green spaces. It blows my mind in Orange County that it's just house after house after city after city after city, and so much wildlife can still exist in such a densely populated area. But we have lots of coyotes, we have lots of bobcats, we have mountain lions not too far away as well. So they're all eating something, but it's definitely not Norway rats, that's for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right, thanks. Others? Get a microphone up here. Sir in the middle, yep.
I was wondering if there's any consistency in how the coyotes who take down a deer start eating that deer versus how a mountain lion takes down a deer, and how they start eating. Because we live up on Saddle Peak, and we've seen, deer carcasses, and there's differences, and it appears that there are differences in how the predator starts eating, or what they start eating first.
So you're asking, can you tell what killed it by,
Yeah.
by what the damage is on
By
the
where they,
carcass?
what's gone first?
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, but I'm not the best person to answer that question. Jeff, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so usually cats and mountain lions and deer, they'll go into the abdominal cavity first. Mountain lions are also always going to drag their kill. You can usually find drag marks. It's always in an area dense covered. They'll also cover that kill as the rest away during the day.
Huh.
In coyotes, mainly around here, at least the deer we'll see from the back end. They'll come in and start. But you have to get to that kill pretty quick.
Huh.
And they don't cache it, right, typically.
Coyotes will tear, they're pack animals. You'll find a leg here, a leg there.
I mean, one,
All right.
Too late.
I mean, one thing too, that, I don't know, that we often say is, if you found the kill, it's probably not a mountain lion.
Huh.
Because basically the mountain lions pretty much always, as Jeff was saying, take their kill and cache it somewhere. And if you find a bunch of deer parts in the middle of a trail, it was very unlikely to have been a mountain lion kill.
And so then by default, would it have been a coyote or a set of coyotes?
Most likely, or maybe it died from something in the coyotes.
Just picked it up, yeah.
You have, what have you seen, Stan, in terms of coyote kills of deer?
Exactly what Jeff said, which is they usually, they will often attack they'll kill the animal at the front, but they start consuming the back.
Interesting. Okay, we had one over here, yep.
Yes, thank you all very much. We've been animal activists for many years, and we live in the city of South Pasadena. And back in the mid-'80s, there were complaints about coyotes. And our mayor was a very smart man. He knew we were activists and we would get out there and do something. So he put my husband on a committee along with 4 other people, 2 of whom had lost their cats to coyotes. By the time they finished their report, they talked to Bill Wirtz. I don't know if any of you know him. He taught at Pomona College, biologist. He had urban coyote studies. They invited a man from the health department who said there's no rabies to worry about. They got somebody from the county trapper actually came and said, yeah, I'll come and trap them, but more will come in. But anyway, by the time they were finished, their report was wonderful, if I have to say so. The mayor loved it, and he appointed a permanent animal commission, which we still have in South Pasadena. And I would urge everybody, if you care about animals, try to get something like that in your city. Information, education was the main thing. We just got word out there, and since the 80s, we have never had citizens coming to the city and asking for killing of coyotes. One other quick thing. I volunteer with Camilla Fox, who I know you all know, and I love her. And she puts out great brochures, which if anybody wants any, I brought some with me. It tells you what to do if you see a coyote and you're frightened, you think he's going to attack you, tells you good ideas what to do. And we made up a little true-false game for children because we go out and set up tables at events. And it's just astonishing how you can see people change right in front of you when you give them facts and they're not so frightened. And children especially are just so open to information. So I can share any of that with anybody, and I just encourage you to use this great information they've given us and share it and try to educate people not to hate the coyote. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. We're going to take 2 more questions. So let's take, I don't know, one from over here and one from back there.
I have the mic,
Okay,
so.
you have the mic, so you're one, okay? And number 2 has a mic as well. Yep.
Thanks. If we repeatedly see a coyote in the daylight hours, 10 a.m., 3 p.m., should we be concerned for the coyote? Is there some significance? Is it weak? Is it hungrier?
Is it rabid?
It's just different.
Yeah. So coyotes in natural systems can be active day or night. So it doesn't mean anything, really. It just means that, in fact, we see a lot of, when I mentioned personalities among coyotes, one of the ways that's manifested is their activity cycles. So many of you, in fact, all of us probably have different activity cycles, right? So do they. It's just that urbanization forces them into the same envelope.
Okay. All right, we have one more back here.
Yeah, thank you very much for this talk. It was really interesting. You touched on the genetic diversity of them, and you're talking about how their life differs as an urban coyote to one that's out in the nature. Are they like us, that once they become a Chicagoan, they're gonna always, like the generations of, they're gonna stay there? And in other words, is it some kind of focusing of their gene pool that they all stay there? Have you observed that?
Another great question. So we are currently doing that work, that genetic analysis. We've been doing it over the last few years, but what it indicates right now is that we're to the point currently that Chicago has its own inherent coyote population. So most of the coyotes are born and bred in Chicago. Very few are actually immigrants from rural areas. In fact, most of the dispersal is occurring from Chicago to other areas. So I didn't show you the slide of our dispersal. We've got coyotes that have left Chicago and gone, down to, Kentucky, Michigan, a lot in Wisconsin. A lot of them are like cheese, I guess. We've had Milwaukee. They leave Chicago and they go to Milwaukee. But we have few genetic examples of those coyotes coming to Chicago because again, it's already occupied. It is occupied.
Okay. All right. What I would like to do now, we've been sitting for a while. It's getting on towards 6 o'clock, and what I'd like to do is just ask each one of our 4 folks here to just sort of answer the following question or give us your thoughts on this. So all of you in different ways are wildlife biologists. All of you work in urban settings. All of you have worked in this area for quite a while. Do you have any, just a final thought for the people here about sort of your perspective on how they might think about, how they might react to, how they might, better interact with urban wildlife? What's the, you got a take-home message for them? Let's start with you, Nita.
Well, I think it's very important that us as biologists and you guys in the community, that we all take responsibility. Oh, sorry. It's probably just my accent. So it's very important that we take responsibility, that it's our job as members of the community to keep wildlife wild. We shouldn't be leaving our dog food out at night. We shouldn't be having huge amounts of landscape for wildlife to hide in if we are worried about conflict. If you're not worried about conflict, then, you can make a coyote jungle in your backyard. But it's very important that when you do see a coyote, they're absolutely beautiful animals, but you do make sure that they still have this fear of humans. We have lots of resources here in LA and Orange County that are almost inviting the coyotes to come into our yards. And I think it's important that we take responsibility for any conflict issues that may arise. You know, I was hiking in Peters Canyon in Tustin in Orange County, and I saw an absolutely beautiful coyote, and I admired it for 10 seconds, and then I went crazy, you know, because it was standing outside someone's yard while 3 or 4 people, you know, just stood there and looked at it. And I was like, well, you know, these are the people in my community that are worried that, you know, they're having their cats eaten or their little dogs taken off leashes and things like that. So I think that for me, the take-home message would be to keep wildlife wild, you know, make sure that we are not fostering any bad habits for wildlife. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Seth? Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Neve was saying there. I mean, I guess I would say it even a little more broadly. I think it's really important. I mean, this is going to be preaching to the choir in this room probably, but just that people understand that if you live near open space, you're going to have wildlife around. And actually, it's even if you're not that near open space, you may have wildlife around. And so you just need to be aware of that. Take responsibility, like Neve said. And I think the more and more we can educate people, especially when people move into this area or move into areas that are next to open space, that's really important. I mean, another thing that I think that we're trying to do more of now is to educate as broad a group of society about wildlife and about living with wildlife as possible. We're here next to the second largest metropolitan area, or in the second largest metropolitan area in the country, but there's tons of folks, especially more in the city, that don't know that much about wildlife, don't get to visit it that much, and I think that's a huge opportunity to really educate people and get them excited more. So.
Absolutely. Erin?
I guess, yeah, I certainly agree with that. And I think LA is a great laboratory, and interacting with wildlife means also interacting with researchers. And, you know, we didn't sort of get trained to study people, but this is part of the equation. So we'll be studying you all as well. And, you know, looking for ways to get your information, and, you know, things that are posted on iNaturalist or other sort of citizen science and crowdsourcing things are becoming really valuable tools for urban wildlife research. So we'll be looking for ways to capture more and more of that information.
And finally, Stan.
So with the introduction that you gave, citing the LA Times, so you're doing battle with coyotes, there's conflicts with mountain lions and things with bobcats, and a bunch of raccoons are tearing up the trash and things. So I felt like I'm very lucky to survive this trip.
That was the LA Times speaking. that was Louis Hagen, not me. So.
Right. So it's fascinating to watch cities right now, because that's a little bit of a good, I guess, symbol of kind of what we're grappling with. So I would say I wish that was only Californians that felt that way, but unfortunately it's going on in other cities. And the thing is that people, as a society, we just need to toughen up a little bit. And we need to appreciate predators instead of looking at them as an inconvenience the whole time. So they're actually bringing in a really important ecological function that's been missing from cities forever, and that is predation. We need predation in many cases. That doesn't mean that we have to just totally give up our property to them. There are ways to manage them, but the key is really managing ourselves. And so you've already had different references to that. You know, someone at UCLA asked me this question yesterday: what's the biggest issue with human-wildlife conflicts? And it's people. We pretty much know, what's going on with most of the animals, but it's actually trying to understand human behavior and why we feel the way we do about carnivores in particular. And so it's going to be fascinating to watch, because, as Erin just mentioned, LA is a laboratory. All cities are laboratories right now. And so it's an interesting development that's occurring, and we'll have to see how it develops over time.
Excellent. Okay, folks, I'd like to, myself personally, thank once again Ross and the team here at Pepperdine, as well as Mario and our team at UCLA, for helping to make this happen in this gorgeous, lovely setting, which I hope will happen next year, same time, same place. We'll keep you all posted. And please join me in thanking Stan for just a great time. Okay, that's it. And I think we have, if you'd like to come up and chat with folks for a minute or two, that